Well, hello. My name is Sarah McCubbin. I'm from 10 Minute Momentum. And as a mom of nine, I am here today to talk about the pros and cons of homeschooling. You see, I was homeschooled many years ago, and my own education included public school, private school, homeschool, early college, all the things. And I have used all of those with my own children and been around the homeschool community for a really long time. I've been a homeschool parent for 16 years. I love it, but there are definitely pros and cons to homeschooling. And I think it's important whether you are trying to reevaluate your choices or whether you're thinking of starting and you don't know what you don't know. Um, I'm here to share with you what I believe are the top pros and cons to homeschooling so you can make better choices or to help you reevaluate what you have going on in your family. So, homeschooling has been around forever, right? But especially during COVID, it has become exceptionally popular. It's grown and grown and grown, and more families are choosing homeschooling, which is fantastic. There are tons of benefits if it fits your family, right? The benefits are huge. So I thought I'd just go through those benefits or pros and kind of rattle those off. So the first one is homeschooling is flexible. As a mom with kids in school and experiencing that inflexible schedule of drop them off by 7:30, pick them up at 3 o'clock, it is much more flexible to homeschool. If you want to homeschool for an hour or two in the morning and then go to a park and then you have dance lessons, or maybe you do a ton of school one week and then you go on vacation next week, it's very flexible. It works around your life. And that's actually the reason we started homeschooling was we needed it to work around our life. So the second benefit to homeschooling is that you can really focus in on your child's unique interests. You can homeschool as many subjects or as few as you would like. In school, students usually have math, English, history, or social studies, science, health, right? You have these very PE, you have very traditional subjects. But when you homeschool, if you have a child that loves a certain thing, like I have a son that loves the sciences, loves chemistry, loves physics. And when he was homeschooled, he did so much science, so much. And yes, he did a little bit of language arts, which is usually kind of like a side dish of language arts, and a little bit of history. He did do that too, but so much science. By the time he was in 10th grade, he had completed 7 high school science courses because he had just loved science so much. So that is awesome in homeschooling. If you have a child that loves something in particular, you can pursue one subject very deeply. You can also pursue that subject and kind of make your language arts, let's say science is your main subject, and you can make your language arts have to do with science, right? You're reading about science, you're writing about science. Same thing with history. You can study scientists and learn about famous people and famous discoveries in history. You can make all your subjects kind of align to your child's deep interest, and that's awesome. The third benefit of homeschooling is that, like I said, you can pursue interests deeply, and your kids can also have time to pursue side interests that are not academic subjects. Maybe you have a kid that loves working with their hands and they love building Lego creations. They can spend a lot of time doing that. In fact, they can listen to their history on an audiobook while they build with Legos. Maybe you have another child that really enjoys baking. Well, let them bake, right? They have lots of time for that. My kids that go to school, they don't get home until 3 or 5:30, depending on if they have sports. They don't have time to pursue their own interests because they have homework and dinner. There's just not a lot of extra time. But when they're homeschooled, they have more time. All right. Homeschooling teaches kids, this is benefit number 4, homeschooling teaches kids to socialize with people of all ages. If they take classes with other homeschoolers, it's usually several grades together, right? Maybe they have like the 8 to 10-year-olds in one class, or the, all the high school students in one class. So they've got a wider range of students to socialize with, but also when you're in homeschool groups, there's a higher ratio of adults to children. And so oftentimes homeschooled students really learn to talk to adults a lot better because they're around a lot more adults in those group situations. Number 5, there are some distinct academic advantages to homeschooling. One of my sons went on to private school in 11th grade, graduated with honors from a private school. And when I've asked him what were the benefits of homeschooling versus private school, he said, homeschooling is the best way to learn as quickly as possible. So if there's something you want to learn, you can dig in, dive in, and learn something as fast as you want. You aren't held up by the teachers. Also, if you have a child that really needs to take a subject more slowly, like maybe they're a struggling reader and they're in 6th grade, that's a big deal if you're in school because all the other subjects expect you to be able to read well. But if you're homeschooled, you can modify what is being taught. And so maybe their reading struggle doesn't become such a big problem in their learning. So homeschooling has some great advantages. All right. Now, if you are a person of faith, benefit number 7 is that homeschooling allows you to share your faith very naturally with your children, just in your day-to-day, right? You can weave in talking to your kids about the Bible, or instructing them on church history, or reading together, or going to church. You can weave this into your day-to-day much more naturally than you can if your children go to school. That said, if your children go to school, you can still share your faith with them. You are still the primary teacher of your faith to your children. Don't get me wrong, that definitely still happens. But when you homeschool and you have them there for so many hours a day, it is much easier to weave that in. All right, benefit number 7, the homeschool community. This is probably one of my favorite benefits of homeschooling. I was a person that grew up without a lot of friends. I was very socially awkward. And the homeschool community is just such a beautiful group of moms and dads and children who are all invested in their children's education. And also, when you join a co-op or another group, they are investing in your children as well. And I have developed lifelong friends from the homeschool community, people that are willing to share their tips and tricks, people that are willing to, support you, teach your children, encourage you. So many things. Lifelong friends are made in homeschool groups. And the number 8 benefit to homeschooling is that it is an excellent quality education, or it can be an excellent quality education, and it is far less expensive than private school. For example, where for my children that are homeschooled, we probably spend on average less than $1,000 a year, or maybe about $1,000 a year for each of them for their school and some classes and some extras, right? That's not just all curriculum. But for my children that go to private school, the tuition is between $8,000 and $12,000 a year. So far more expensive, right? So you can get a very quality education for a lot less money. And in some cases, it's even less expensive than public school, because when your children are young, you can homeschool for almost free. And I say that when they're young, because when they get older, most kids really do want some extra options. They want the ability to tailor their education. So it's a lot harder to do it for free. But homeschooling can be done very inexpensively, especially when they're young. All right. Now, to move on to the disadvantages of homeschooling. And I think this part is really, really important to talk about because sometimes you don't know the cons, the disadvantages until you've done something for a while. Oftentimes, these are things that people don't talk about as vocally. And sometimes people are embarrassed to talk about it. Sometimes it's not socially acceptable to talk about this in a group that's like, we're pro homeschooling, but I have been around homeschooling for almost 40 years. And I can tell you there are some distinct disadvantages or cons in some situations. Okay, so let's jump in. The number one, homeschooling can be isolating socially. All right. There's this whole joke about, unsocialized homeschoolers. And that's not what I'm talking about, right? Homeschoolers, if they want social opportunities, there are tons, and families can plug in and do a million things, way more than when I was little. But not everyone wants to do that. Sometimes you have a parent that is an introvert, right? And then you have extroverted children. And so the parent is like happy to stay home day in and day out and not go anywhere. But then you have kids that really want connections and they want to be around people and they want friends and they want to do all these things. The reality is that the kids can start to feel socially socially isolated. Okay. And it's not something that you should disregard. If you have a kid that's really struggling and they want friends, then it's time to look at how you can create these opportunities to build friendships. And I'll drop a link to a couple posts below where I talk about how you can build friends, not build them, how you can meet friends, make friends as a homeschooler and just as any kid. How can you make friends? All right, the number two con, homeschooling can feel and can actually be very expensive. When you go to a public school, there are a lot of built-in extras in that public school experience. You're not buying curriculum, right? Usually the clothing you wear is, you can just wear whatever you want to wear. There's often a lot of extracurricular opportunities like French club or band or, sports. And sometimes there's a small fee to participate in those, but it's usually way, way less than if you have to pay to do specific lessons, take, violin lessons somewhere. That's way more expensive than participating in band. So homeschooling can feel pretty expensive, especially if you have more than one child. Number three disadvantage, that would be that homeschooling can be really challenging if you have a special needs child. Now, homeschooling with special needs is totally possible, but I will tell you, I have one son that has some special learning challenges. And when I started homeschooling, I had no idea what resources existed for him. So I just was like spinning my wheels, trying really hard to help him learn how to read. And it wasn't working. And I'd try this and I'd try that. And I was spending all my time trying to help him and I couldn't help the other kids. And it was really, really hard. And so trying to find the resources for a special needs child can be really draining and really difficult. I'm not saying it's not worth doing. I'm saying if it's part of your scenario, then you need to invest some time to find what resources are in your area to lift the burden, because just trying to do everything yourself, especially if you have multiple children, is a recipe for exhaustion. All right. And number 4, homeschooling does not necessarily have built-in support. Now, if you go to a church where there's a lot of homeschoolers, if you found a homeschool support group or you go to a co-op, yes, there are supports that exist. But when you have a child that goes to school, there are some built-in supports. If they're struggling academically, there's usually tutoring. If they need some help, if they want to play sports, there's a coach there. If there are Sometimes, I mean, the schools in our area, if your kids don't have school supplies, they have a school supply closet. And if your child needs clothes, when we were foster parents, they told us there was a clothing closet. Like there was like needs could be met. Food, they had food pantry at the school. Like they had lots of basic supports there that when you homeschool, you have to find those supports. Whereas in a school, a lot of them are already available all in one place. So that's just something to be aware of. Number 5, that is your family may not be supportive of homeschooling. And you might be nodding along. This is very common. If your family is not familiar with homeschooling, you didn't grow up homeschooled, your family may be not supportive, but it could be coming from a place of concern, worry that like you'll be exhausted, worry that your children won't have friends, worry that, they won't be able to go back to school if you want to try that later, that there'll be some problems. They could be legitimately concerned, or they could just be genuinely unsupportive. So that can feel kind of isolating because most of us, our support group, our basic support group is our family. And so if your family doesn't support you, that can be a huge con. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be aware. All right. Number 6, the disadvantage of homeschooling. Oh, this one is for me. This is it. Homeschooling requires a ton of parental energy. And I made another video where I talked about the year we quit homeschooling. And this was it. Like I was exhausted. Burnout is a real thing. And the reason it requires so much energy is that you have your children with you 24/7. And now you have the full responsibility of their education. You've got that responsibility. You probably have some pressure from outside sources, could be family, could be your spouse. You could even have pressure from your children, like, Mom, I want to be around my friends again, right? It requires a lot of energy to do that day in and day out. And there are ways to deal with this, but it's definitely something you want to plan for. If you're just starting off homeschooling, you need to know that it's going to be exhausting some days. And if you don't make a plan for it, then burnout is a real thing. Like it can get to the point where this isn't fun anymore and it's not really even meeting your goals because you're so tired. All right. Number 7, the disadvantage of homeschooling is that extracurriculars can be more challenging and expensive for homeschoolers. So, for example, if you have children in school, well, my children are in school, so some of them, and so they run cross country. The school day finishes and they start their sport 10, 15 minutes later, right? And they run, and then I come pick them up. But the thing was, I didn't have to run them to different locations. Each kid didn't have to go to a different spot across town, here, here, here. They're all at one place. And so the amount of driving, while I do have to drive them to school, the amount of running around in the day is much, much less than when you have homeschooled kids who maybe one has a science lesson here, and then an hour later, another one has dance lessons. And lo and behold, another one has dance lessons, but their lesson doesn't start for another hour. So you got to sit in your car and you get the picture. Like you're running back and forth and you've got more time because you're home, but you're not actually home because you're the driver to all the other activities, and they're rarely all at the same location. So you can spend a lot of time shuttling your kids around, and usually those extracurriculars cost more when you do them, when you pay for private lessons, than if you would participate in an activity through a school. All right. And the last con is that homeschooling might not work if both parents work, or if you're a single parent, or if you've got a custody issue going on, right? There's a variety of reasons why homeschooling might not work. Now, I will drop a post below where I talk about some of the things to think about if that's your situation where you're like, hey, for homeschooling, I have to have a parent at home. And if both parents work, that might not work. Um, what other options are there? Or if you're a single parent, you have to work. Maybe you can't be at home with your kids. What are you going to do? Right. Or if you have a custody situation going on where your ex is saying, no, you can't homeschool and the courts haven't decided and you've got a kind of a fight on your hands. Um, these can be some definite cons to homeschooling. Now, the reality is that the pros and cons of homeschooling are really about finding something that's the best fit for your family. So, for one family, the fact that you have to spend money on homeschooling, that it feels expensive, maybe it's not expensive for that family, but another family with less money might feel like it is, right? Maybe one person, somebody who has only one child, they might not think all the extracurriculars running around is a burden, but somebody who has 5 kids and a baby might feel like driving around a lot is challenging. So being aware of all the pros and cons is helpful because it can help you make the best decision for your family in each season of your life. If you have questions or you need someone to like talk through your homeschool situation, feel free to reach out. I'm a homeschool and education coach. I'd be happy to work with you and come up with a situation that is the best fit for your family. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching this. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe.